So here's a question. Is leadership a critical component of local food system work? For example, who led the effort in Flint to build this, the new outdoor farmers market? Well, they've got an indoor market there too, for that matter. What leader at Vanderbilt Medical Center determined that it would be good to have a farmers market right at the hospital there in Nashville? It's an amazing thing. They're one of the first to do that. Who led the Dayton Food Bank's effort to start gardening in the vacant lot right outside of their major warehouse where their distribution is? They grew 1,800 pounds of food in 2017. And that was just the startup year. It will go from there. They're growing from there. Who says that food summits can positively impact the economy? What leader figured that out, put that together? These are all leadership questions. Critical components of local food system work and local food expansion. So, hey everybody, my name is Brian Raison. I am at Ohio State University, but today I'm down in Dayton, standing outside the 2nd Street local public market. It's open year-round, and in about an hour I'm going to head in and have lunch with another local food leader who is actually starting a new grocery cooperative here in Dayton on the west side, an underserved area. And we're going to talk about leadership. We're going to talk about how that effort is going and what's getting it off the ground. For today, though, this is for Iowa State University Extension's local food community economic development training. And so we're going to go through some topics and see if we can add to this collection of trainings. So for the topics today, it's why that they've asked me. We're going to do this in like 10 minutes, right? I'm going to try. Why is leadership important? Why does it matter? I want to talk about a little bit about leadership theory and practice, simply because that's what I teach at Ohio State, theory and practice in leadership systems. I want to talk about roles for food systems leaders, and then that ostensible boredom. So we'll talk about that in a minute. So, okay. First of all, why does leadership matter? Well, here's an example from a couple years ago. And this was at the end of an 8-hour meeting. It went till 3 in the morning. There was an amazing local food group called Stone's Throw, and they had started this market. And the leaders of that market basically went off to grad school. And so in making the transition, we were unable to make it happen, and it failed. There were a couple of hundred people who were actively buying food who had this thing put together. It was really cool, but it couldn't survive the leadership transition. That was a tough thing to see gone. The next year, I was talking with Jim Barham over in Washington, D.C. at the Southern Rural Development Food Meeting, and he said, Brian, food hubs, we're not seeing them fail because they can't get growers or customers. It's leadership. Another example, at Iowa State here, actually, in 2015, we were working with the Community Local Regional Food Systems and the NASFN food certificate system, and as we listened to real practitioners in the field, this is what we heard them say. Those are my notes from the actual meeting. I still have them. But they weren't talking about needing assistance in growing or finding farmers. It was in leadership things, in vision casting, in facilitation, in team building. Here's a close-up of the notes that I saved. I mean, it was a remarkable thing to hear that and to realize that leadership was a critical component. So let's talk a little theory and practice really quickly before we get too much further. First, the definition. What is leadership? It's pretty simple stuff. It's the act of leading a group of people or an organization. But the involvement, what it really details, is creating that vision, sharing that vision, and then providing a way to realize the vision with your information, knowledge, methods, capital, resources, things like that, human and financial. And then managing the conflicting interests. So, not too bad. That sounds like a doable thing. In my graduate classes here at Ohio State, when I'm teaching this stuff, I'm always looking for where does theory intersect with practice, because that's where the rubber meets the road. That's where places like the 2nd Street Market and the buddy of mine that leads this market, Jimmy, does an amazing job in managing all of the vendors that come in there, the customers, the requests. At the far end they have a room for you can do weddings or meetings or whatever. So he's doing a lot, but he's managing real life practice while really deploying leadership theory, whether he thinks about it in those terms or not. He probably does, he's a smart guy. So theories and framework, you've heard about a lot of these, autocratic, participative, transformational leadership theory. I think Bass put that one together a few years ago. Authentic leadership, servant leadership, charismatic. If you've done the Gallup Strengths Finder, the woo, winning others over, that charisma that some people have. And then leadership in and while managing is another piece that's very important. But the ongoing question is, the thing that we always try to think about is, how can you use these leadership theories to develop your personal approach and your style to make that impact, particularly in your work in food systems. So the key response that I found and that I've seen in my work 20 plus years at Ohio State, the last 10 really focused in food systems, quite a bit in food systems, is that you can manage, leaders can manage, you can put out fires, do the basic planning and budgets and all that, but the transformational leaders, those ones that are really successful, embrace authenticity and transparency, and they deploy it with EQ, that emotional intelligence that you've probably read a little bit about, and then they use other strategies really affect organizational culture, and that's one of the key things that will lead you to success. So let's run through some of those really quickly. Here's Tim Kite. He works for a group called Focus 3. Actually, he leads it. And he consults with Urban Meyer and the Ohio State Buckeye football team in talking about this very stuff. He spoke at our annual conference a couple of years ago. And his main thesis is that the leaders create the culture of the organization. A lot of times, those leaders, though, start by looking at the results. How many pounds are we growing? How many farmers do we have? How many customers do we have? And he says that's not the right thing to do. What the leader needs to do is start with the organizational culture. Think about our Stone's Throw market that failed. It failed because of leadership. The culture in that group of 200 people who were buying had some trust issues. They thought that one person wanted to take it over, and so it was the organizational culture that ultimately led to the failure. What Tim says is that the culture drives the behavior, and then the behavior produces the results. And as the leader, you're creating culture by either default or design. One way or the other, you're doing it because that's your role, and so you're setting that. And so one of the key things is to not focus on the results. Start with the organizational culture, and a way to do that is by deploying the old emotional intelligence. Some say people used to call these soft skills. Well, these are critical skills in today's workforce. So I'm not going to go deep into the theory. I'm just going to run through this really quickly. So EQ is just recognizing your own emotions, recognizing the emotions in others, and then figuring out how to discriminate those feelings, and then act. How can that guide your thinking and your behavior? Another way of saying is EQ is another way to be smart in thinking about relationships in particular. So the components of this, and again, you can look through the slides or read a little bit more about it. It's that self-awareness, understanding yourself, recognizing or self-regulation, pressing pause when you need to instead of just jumping right in. I have a tendency to jump right in. The motivation, how do you manage that? Empathy, that awareness of others, other centricity, and then social skills. How do you deploy those? So skip that chart. When Brian talks about it, he talks about E plus R equals O. That events happen, and then you add in the response, whatever we do as the response, and it equals an outcome. And I love this. He says this formula takes 10 seconds to understand, but a lifetime to master. So here's an example to make you kind of think about this. So, car just went by. Let's say you're driving down the road and somebody's tailgating you right up there on your bumper. What do? I mean, when they're just tailgating, what do you do? Do you wave at them with one finger? Do you tap the brakes? I ask groups this all the time. I hit the brakes. Oh yeah, and what is that? So the event is the tailgating. The tapping the brakes is your response, and that just leads to an escalated outcome, which is not good. And today, we were in Florida at the holidays, my in-laws, and there was a road rage. Guy pulls out a gun and starts shooting. And so the whole point is, your response can change the outcome. The key question is, what does the situation require of me? So think about it when you're in that meeting and somebody creates an event for you and you need to respond. You need to engage the executive brain. Urban Meyer calls it the above-the-line response, not that emotional reaction or reactive response. The skills for this, and again, you can look at this later, read more about it. You press pause, get in your right mind, win the moment, and make the difference. You make the right decision. The key thing, and I tell my graduate students this, the number one thing the entire semester is that your response creates an event for somebody else. It's a big piece. Really something to think about. All right, so strategic planning. I'm going to blow through this really fast. What are we on time? 10 minutes. Oh, we're not doing bad. Okay. So why does planning matter? Shift gears. Okay. So if your organization doesn't plan, what's the future? How do you know that you're going to have a future? Soichiro Honda said, there's only one future, and it's made of our dreams. And it's the same idea, or a different way of looking at it, saying there are two futures: the one that's going to happen if we don't do anything, if we don't dream, or the one that might be if we take the time to plan and dream and think it through. So when you're managing complex change and thinking about it, you've got to deploy things like strategic planning. Now, granted, the day-to-day management is a top priority. Your farm market managers, Jimmy's got to run this place. However, when you think about transition, succession planning, you've got to do these things. Boards, long-term boards, how can they continue? How can that organization make that leap when the leadership changes, as we saw in the one example that I gave earlier? The strategic planning and assessment, really it's two ways. It's current state, future state. So when you think about that, what are we currently facing? How do things look? And how do we want them to look in the future? And then that can change our actions. That could drive us to make the right decisions that will lead us forward and grow the markets, create jobs in the local economy, eat healthier food, et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot to it. One of the key principles is thinking about your stakeholders. They're the best experts. I'm working with a group in a neighborhood just not far from here. It's an historic group. The neighbors who live there are the best folks. They're the experts that can talk about and think through and plan what they want that historic district to look like. And so that board has to recognize that and bring them together, and they're doing that. So partnership development, a couple more topics we'll finish up because it's cold out here. Leadership in local food. What is it about? It's bringing people together. It's finding those partners. Tremendous power and strength in partnerships. And just an example of a list there of folks that you want to talk with. Developing food councils. We've done quite a bit of that across Ohio. We've had a number of them. I'm going to say 25 or 30 of our 88 counties have food councils. And they are doing neat things. Those councils are coming together, or councils, and they're planning locavore dinners and food summits and shared use kitchens, and they're bringing that energy and ideas, and it's pretty neat stuff. They're definitely making an impact. Farm to institution, farm to school, healthier food, education programs, lots of stuff going on. Okay, I think I'm getting close to my time, so let's wrap up here. How about ostensible boredom? Is going to meetings like this, you've been there, you're just PowerPoints, death by PowerPoint, more dreadful meetings. There's our friends up in Michigan State, just kill me now, another meeting. Really? Is this going to be the most boring work? Does leadership involve nothing but boring meetings? It's a legitimate question. I've thought about it a time or two when sitting in the back of a meeting, but I say wait, there's hope. Here's a group of local chefs that I was meeting with. This is about a year or two ago, planning a locavore dinner. It's in its third year now. Fourth year. This past year, we grossed almost $6,000 and netted about $1,500 that goes back into our local food council to do more activities. Pretty cool meeting. Here's outdoor folks planning a garden, an urban center garden you see right across the street. You're right downtown. Here's another, creating a new shared kitchen space for food entrepreneurs. So lots of opportunities. Doesn't have to be boring. Here's a sensory evaluation. This is a HOPS sensory evaluation meeting. This is at Iowa State. I had to blank the faces out there just in case. Anyway, so you can definitely have some fun with it. I just want to say thank you guys. Glad to connect. hope this has been helpful. Definitely dig into some of the slides that I went over quickly and get some more information. So God bless you. You're doing great work in food systems. It really matters. It makes a difference. It's making us healthier. Take care.